Hello, my name is Roy Poyan. I'm the Director of Families Impacted by Opioids. I want to welcome you back to another episode of Fentanyl and Families in Harm's Way. This episode is going to cover the topic of relapse. Now, you may say, well, Roy, we've covered that back in an earlier seminar. We touched on it. We didn't really dive deeply into it. Relapse is so critical. When you start to take a look at the relapse, it is likely that it will happen more than once. So when it comes to financials, save your powder and understand that the first time you go into a rehab center may not be the best time for you to take out a loan on the equity in your house or start to cash in major portions of your 401k. There could very well be more relapses. So we have to make this last financially as well. And that's why the community mapping as a process is very helpful to you, because you can start to figure out some of the longevity of your money. But with that in mind, regarding relapse, we do have 3 stages to it. And you can prepare now for those stages. You can decide, listen, we need to talk to somebody in the clinical realm of what do we do when we start to see nutrition drop? What do we do when we start to see them avoiding going to this 12-step program, or he's not showing up to work on a regular basis? In other words, his self-care has identified as being present as a problem, and enough so that we're noticing. It may also be that he's or she is in the mental phase, which is phase 2, in which case you should already have thought of which counselor, which psychologist or family therapist will engage if this comes up. You see, we're preparing for this. We're not going to sit there and say, oh, gee, we're surprised that he relapsed. We're not anticipating it and every day waking up saying, is this the day he'll relapse? Don't do that to yourself. If it happens, it happens. If you're prepared, you're prepared. If you're going to go through this blindly and just let it hit you out of the blue, then don't be surprised in that and how that turns out for you either. Because we know that they're likely going to relapse. We want to be understanding of that. We want to be empathetic and in a loving way have constructed how we will handle ourselves so that an appropriate level of response is provided by us, and in a reasonable way it's congruent with exactly what's taking place as this all kind of like unfolds in front of us. So with that in mind, we're going to take time. We're going to go to the kitchen table, not the kitchen table, but the family table. In my case, it's typically the kitchen table. And then we will take a look at exactly what we would do in the 3 stages from what is presented as the 3 stages in the study guide. We'll take each phase, break it down and say, how will we respond? What kind of solution is reasonable? What decisions are possibly going to be needed, and is there kind of like a template plan that we can put together in self-care? Doing the same thing for the mental health phase. What is it that we would notice? How would we create a solution around it, make a decision, and create a plan of action? And once again, it seems like, egads, Roy, you're asking us to do so much. And what I'm trying to explain to you is, you're going to do this anyhow. Only you're going to end up doing it at a time that is at 3 in the morning. You've been worrying about this for 17 days. You're worn out. You've got work to worry about. You've got your other children going to school to concern yourself with. And now you've got this, which you're totally unprepared for. No, because you're taking these courses now, you will be prepared for it. You see the logic here? I'm sure you do. And that's where we want to make sure we're making a difference for you and helping you to make a difference for yourself. So come on over to the family table and let's take a closer look at exactly what's taking place in the relapse and what it's going to mean as far as things that you can prepare for and then do while it's happening. Hello, thank you for joining me at the family table. Here's a topic that we really need to spend some time on because it just seems as though in some ways we would like to face the fact that a relapse can happen. And in other ways, we kind of want to think positively, and we should, and you want to. You want to live in a life of affirmation that the right things will happen and good will come of what you're doing, because it will. But sometimes it looks a little confusing, and it really looks confusing when a relapse happens. A lot of people think they failed. Some people think they failed the person thinks they failed themselves, the person feels that they failed the people that are supporting them. It's a perfect environment if you wanted everybody to question themselves, get off track. And the strength of being prepared is that you not let yourself do that. So let us say here today, if a relapse happens, be understanding of it. Don't reject it. Don't act like you didn't see it coming or you didn't know that a relapse could happen. Because you're taking this episode, you now realize relapses do happen. By the way, in a chronic disease, which this is, you will have relapses. In hypertension, you have relapses. In diabetes, you have relapses. These are congestive heart failure, COPD, all these different types of diseases that are chronic and ongoing throughout the rest of our lives. We have relapses. So why should we feel that this particular chronic disease, which is a chronic disease of the brain, would not have a relapse? It very well might. Now, what we don't want to do, and you don't do it when you're dealing with these other medical conditions, is you don't sit there and live like the shoe's going to drop off your foot and you'll only be walking around with one shoe on. Well, that's not the way that's going to be most effective for you to live your life. Being prepared for when it does happen, meaning if it was diabetes, you would know to get back in touch with your endocrinologist. You'd go in, he'd do a blood draw, they would look at the lab results, he would probably, or she would probably tweak your medications. Maybe you discuss more work with a nutritionist. Now, these are all characteristics of how do we treat a variance? So I want you to think of this as being a line, meaning the plan of care in substance use disorders as a chronic disease after the acute care setting. We're now in the chronic management, which is most of your life, and you're going along. All of a sudden, there's a spike. It's called a variance. Something's happened, and now you need to intervene and bring it back down so that you can continue on with the plan of care. It may be that the plan of care has changed, and it's a new plan of care based on the variance and the new set of circumstances that are required. So you're starting to see this as, well, we're acting like we're clinical and case managers. You are, okay? You're a family member that cares about the person in whose life you're involved in and they're involved in yours. And for that reason, getting smart about this, kind of why we're here. But the fact is, we want to know exactly what is needed because there's too much to know about all that's happening. So in that regard, we want to take a look at the 3 stages of relapse. There are actually 3 areas that take place that you can observe before the relapse happens. Most people don't know this. So if you're in a support group, please share it. But with that in mind, the 3 stages might happen like that. It may take a couple of days. It may take a couple of weeks. It may take a couple of months. Each stage may take a couple of months. That's not something that we can predetermine. But you should know what those stages are. And in our study guide, we introduce that to you. So it's no longer a mystery. But the fact is, this is all NIH, SAMHSA, ASAM, and empirically proven studies that have shown this to be true. We're just boiling it down so that you can use it to your advantage. The first stage of the 3 stages of the relapse is considered kind of an emotional stage. It's called self-care, and it's their self-care. And it's in areas such as, Janet's not really taking time to cook good food. And matter of fact, she's eating a lot of fast food, a lot of greasy fast food. And many times she's just skipping, meals altogether. She says she's not hungry. She's not hydrating. We rarely see her drinking water. And in other areas, her sugar content and everything, it's just a mess. I mean, we go in there and in the morning, there's White Castle, empty White Castle hamburger boxes all over the living room. And the refrigerator has a jar of mayonnaise and mustard in it, a bottle of, milk, and that's it. And you pretty much know things are not good in Janet's world.
as far as nutrition goes, which is one of the indicators of the beginning of a relapse. Another indicator is they're not attending their AA or NA meetings, or they're not participating when they go to those meetings. That's a sign that they're starting to relapse. It can be a sign. It's not a guaranteed, but it can be a sign. You start to put these together. Other types of things, late for work, missing work, lost work, okay? These are things that we use when we're taking care of ourselves to monitor how well am I doing in my life. I personally would realize that I've got a problem in my life if I'm not showing up to work. It would be an indication to me. But because I'm starting to relapse, I can convince myself that this was their problem. And somebody outside my life might sit there and say, hey, Roy, that's your third job in the past 4 months. Maybe you got a problem here. Yeah, actually, unbeknownst to all of us, I'm about to relapse. So now we start to sit there and say, well, then what's stage 2? Because obviously they don't typically go from self-care to relapse. They go through what's known as a mental relapse. So we had an emotional relapse. Now we have a mental relapse. These 3 things build up in its finality to the relapse. So in the mental relapse, that's where you hear them starting to say, I kind of enjoyed it when, we did this while we were high. Or, I really miss Jerry. He was a good guy. He made me laugh when we would get stoned. And boy, I miss him. These are mental relapses. They're starting to romance the idea that maybe it wasn't so bad. And towards the end of that, they start to tell themselves cognitively that I think I could probably use it again. I mean, how could it hurt me? I'll just, the holidays are coming up. I'll buy some. I'll just use it maybe 3 times over the weekend. And then I won't use it anymore come Monday. Okay, so they're starting to mentally tell themselves that this is something that they can actually do, which, by the way, they cannot. And so with that in mind, they move to the physical. And in the physical, they're telling themselves, when I come home from work, I've always avoided the neighborhood that takes me down the street where that abandoned house was. I wonder how they're doing. Remember the mental? And they say, I think I'll just swing by. I won't stop, but I think I'll just swing by there, And I'll prove to myself that I don't have to stop if I'm in that area, because that'll show me that I'm really doing okay. And they drive down and they see it and they see Jerry. They're like, hey, Jerry, Oh boy, this is not good. This is what's known as physical relapse. Then they start to think, well, I'll go down there again. And, from my mental, they're not thinking like this, but this is what's taking place. From my mental relapse, I've kind of convinced myself I probably could buy it. And by the way, I am driving down the street and there's Jerry. And I know that if I pull over, I can give him $20 and get 5 bags and, everything's going to be great, for at least, I could probably even do what I normally did in the morning. Now that I've been away from it for a while, I could probably get away with 5 bags and they'd last me like for the whole day. And $20, nobody would really notice that I spent it. And yeah, I could do this. They're physically now relapsing. So then they actually act on it. Believe it or not, this has been studied. And it's been empirically proven. So we do know that these things take place. Like I said, it might happen like that, or it might take a month, or it might take, several weeks. It's impossible to say. Now, there's another aspect of the relapse that we want to make sure we identify with, and that is in your workbook, you'll want to start to take a look at, what are the things that we can be asking of ourselves, in terms of what are you seeing, social withdrawal and isolation. This is, by the way, out of the workbook that I'm reading this. And then what can the family do, in terms of denial, in terms of, he was saying that, but I don't think he really meant it. Time out here. He said it. He meant it. It's not a good or healthy thing for you to do, to deny that he said, or because you're basically not allowing yourself to see that he's in the self-care posture of relapsing. Okay? It will advance to the mental. And then, so when you sit there, you say, well, what can the family do? Well, what do you do? You can decide that now. When we see him starting to say these things, and if you don't have a good answer to that question, ask a drug counselor to help you formulate this portion of this workbook for you so that it's tailored to your type of family dynamic, the way you have conversations, and your personality style. I mean, we're trying to use you to the best you can be in these situations by empowering you with knowledge, but you still have to kind of like maturate and mold it into what's comfortable for you. Now, as we start to look at other things like poor eating habits, what can the family do? It asks this here in this practical exercise. Answer the question. You're better suited at this than we would be to answer it for you. So when you start to look at mood swings and the inability to control, how they're feeling, their reactions, they get angry, they fly off the handle. These are signs that their self-care is off, their emotions are off. It shows that they're weakening, and they're going to make themselves susceptible to a trigger that's coming up. And that's what we're trying to help them to navigate. And anger is one of those. You might sit there and say, oh, I think it's reasonable for him to be angry. He's not getting sleep, the drug withdrawal and the recovery process. He's got rapid leg motions, which keep him up all night. He's tired. Of course he's going to be angry. No. Okay, the fact is that's going to be one, and then you have other elements, and they start to accumulate. You need to start to calculate, where are we? How many of these kind of emotions are we seeing? Well, what can the family do? Well, this is why you did the community support mapping. You get them back in with a drug counselor. You get them back in with a family therapist for cognitive behavioral therapy. You don't sit there and say, maybe it'll go away. That's enabling. Remember probable awareness? It's number 7 of the 10 types of enabling. So, let's go back to what you can do, because that's what these are about. You cannot control them. You cannot control them. You cannot make the relapse not happen. That will never be the case. They have a difficult time controlling the fact that the relapse is going to happen. However, you now have information that helps you to monitor when you do see these things. The only way you're going to be able to respond efficiently and effectively is if before they happen, you've already decided, if I start to see this person create kind of a theater round of anger and manipulation and not eating well and missing work, whoa, you've got a situation on your hands. And for you to sit there and say, I know from this episode that this is one of the stages that leads to relapse. Then when they relapse, please don't sit there and say, gee, I should have done something, but I didn't. Don't be that person. Be the person that sat there and said, I didn't feel comfortable taking action, but we called the drug counselor and he advised us to get Jerry to call him, because then the drug counselor was able to get him in, because that's what they're skilled at doing. And boy, am I glad I did. You'll have no idea whether or not that was the beginning of a relapse. You'll never really know, because it didn't play out. But the fact is, you can have confidence from this material, which, by the way, is what the professionals have said need to be done. They would say it directly to you, but for some reason, they don't spend time trying to talk to family members. I guess that's our job. But the fact is, we're here talking to you now, and it's still their same information. None of this is ours. And with that in mind, you need to take the time in advance to determine how are we going to respond to self-care. And then the same is true, and you see this in the workbook, by the way, so I'm not saying anything that you can't follow up with for yourself. The same is true for mental relapse. And by the way, if you get online and you Google in mental relapse, you'll find a slew of professional videos and clinical papers. So you can become very educated on just this specific stage of the relapse. And I would strongly recommend you do that. Remember, our materials are just the beginning of your thinking, okay? Nothing we say here you should go out and act on. What you would do is you would take this, you'd go to a professional and say, hey, I learned a little bit about this topic. Can we talk more about the reality and practicality involved in what we're dealing with regarding our daughter, Janet? So with that in mind, self-care is emotional. Mental health is rationalization. They're starting to rationalize their thinking. And then the physical relapse is them actually acting on it. And what we end up doing is we end up saying, okay, can we apply the 3D coping skills to this? Absolutely. One of the issues might be you don't feel comfortable in addressing self-care because you're not quite sure that that's what you're seeing. So the issue is you need to be more comfortable with this. Now, what's the solution? Well, I'll let you decide that, but if you use the determine a solution model, you'll answer the 6 questions, you'll have your solution. And then you'll move to the decision, and you'll develop a decision about, so what are you going to do about the fact that you don't feel comfortable? And you might sit there and think, with all that's going on, Roy, you want me to take time to slow my life down and deal in this kind of minutia? Yes, I do. I truly do. This is the area that if you spend your time today, tomorrow, you're going to be so empowered with the ability to know what to do. But not only that, to know that you tried to know what to do is going to be very gratifying, and it's going to help you to develop a pattern. When you as a family member do these kind of steps, you're showing an incredible volume of love. Now, think about this. If there are other children involved or other people are seeing you do this, they're learning from your experience. You're actually creating a generational hand down on when our family is addressing these kind of issues, we get smart and we figure out how knowledge is applied to our lives, and then we determine a solution, develop a decision, and design a plan of action. Isn't that the kind of family you want in way before a crisis happens? Because you can apply this exact same methodology to almost every aspect of your life. Practice it here, because right now your family dynamic is you are a family that for the rest of your lives will be living with substance use disorders as a part of your family dynamic. That will never go away. You'll find it easier to live with as you start to practice good coping skills. And that's what our role is here today. So take the time to take a look at the 3 stages. Research the topics of each stage. Then apply it to your life and determine ahead of time, what are you going to do should these specific types of things start to present themselves? And write it down, because it's a great reminder to you. You've got a lot of work, and we're suggesting that you do a lot of things. The relapse is one of the most emotionally troubling. It's just devastating. And I really feel sorry for everybody that goes through this. I'll speak with people that will say, my daughter's in rehab, and this is her first time. Well, they won't say it that way. They'll say they're in rehab. We're looking forward to her getting out. And I'll ask, has she been in rehab before? And they'll say, oh, no. But when she gets out, we're going to really care about her, and she'll never go back again. And I'm thinking, I kind of think you need to get educated about what is a relapse. And then understand it's not a failure. It is a part of the brain disease. And when it happens, everybody has a chance to once again show your support and your love and your empathy, because those are the family values that become a part of us spiritually and soulfully. And it is probably the most important expression during this whole journey of your ability to welcome back this lost person. Because in effect, what you're doing by taking these courses is you're creating a fertile ground to bring them back into the fold. Because more than likely right now, without this information, you don't know what's going on, you're frightened by it, and that's understandable. And because you don't know where to put it and make it something that could be productive, which this will do, you'll more than likely reject this person. That's the worst thing that can happen to them, is to be rejected by their family. They understand why. They get it. They hate themselves for it. They may not be able to express that to you. They do. Every person in recovery will say, I am so angry at myself for what I've done to the people that cared about me. It devastates them. It's kind of hard to realize that when it's happening to you and you're the one that's having to put up with it. Maybe that's your challenge in life, is that you're going to have to reach deeper into your soul and come up with a better expression of you. We hope that this material helps you to do that. Hello, I want to thank you for continuing to view our episode. And we're now going to work into the area of the 3Ds. This is an important characteristic for the family to develop skills in. And we'll start by taking the time to look at an issue and then determine the issues based on the area of determining a solution, developing a decision, and designing a plan of action. By using your Module 3 workbook and going to a specific issue, you'll be able to find that the first step in that 3D skill set is the FTR, the Family Transformational Model. And the Family Transformational Model is a set-up way, each time the same way, that we will take 5 categories to look at in determining a solution. And each category is going to have 3 questions. So let's get started. The first is to define the issue. Naturally, we'll want to know what the issue is. The word issue is really problem, but we're saying the word issue is, the reason we're saying the word issue is it's just a little bit easier to digest, because it's not always a problem. Sometimes it's just something that's happening, and we need to determine a solution to it. The next question is, how does the issue impact the family? We need to know that. We need to know, we have an issue, that's fine. The issues can exist, but if it's impacting the family, in what way is it impacting the family? And then what steps can the family take to prepare and then respond to the issue? That's very important for us to know. The fact is that this issue exists and it's impacting the family. We tend to believe maybe there was something we could have done to kind of get ready for it. And if there was, then we would want to have taken those steps, which is what all these episodes are about. And then who can help assist us and the family in our response? So we want to start to ask ourselves, we know that there's an issue, we know that it's impacting the family, and there are things that we could do to prepare for this, but we're probably going to need a resource, information, another person outside of our family, or maybe one of our family members specifically can use their functionality and contribute. So we want to identify that. And then what should the family expect as their outcome? And kind of a start with the end in mind thought, where we're saying, if we're going to do something, it's going to result in something. So is that result desirable? Is that really what we want? Because if we're going to create a solution, then we want the solution's outcome to be what we expect it would be. So in each of these categories that I just described, 1 through 5, there are 3 questions, and we're going to ask ourselves each of these. Let's go back into the first category, define the issue. Clearly state what happened or what will happen. We want to know very clearly what happened or what's likely to happen. And then write that down. Identify who's involved or who should be involved. And then what would you like to have happen or like to see happen? The third question in every category is going to be used. You'll see how in just a minute. But just remember, the third question in every category, so this question right here, the way you answer it, will be reused. Now, the next question is, how is the issue impacting the family? Who in the family exactly is impacted? In what way are they impacted? And then the third question is, what is needed to move forward? And then the third category is, what steps can the family take to prepare and then respond to the issue? The three questions again. What needs to be done? And then prioritize that list. Who needs to be involved? And then what will it look like, the third question, what will it look like when completed? Then the fourth category is, who can help and assist the family in their response? The three questions are, how to search and organize this organization to help you. In other words, it's not enough that you know you're going to go and introduce yourselves to a treatment center in your community. You want to start to determine, how do I look for them and organize my way of seeking help, because it might not just be that group alone. You may also need other services to kind of start to create a who can assist us. And it may be many different types of people. What to ask from them, and then what to expect. Remember the third question, what to expect. And then the fifth category is, what should the family expect as their outcome? Well, that has to do a lot with timing. And if it takes a certain amount of time, let's be realistic of what that is. That has something to do with the expense of the involvement, of getting involved in this issue. And then the third question being, required changes, our changes as family members, for this response to successfully take place. Now, let's state what our solution is. Hey, this is the great news. You've already developed your solution. By answering each of these three questions, the third question in every category, you'll pull forward now into your statement. So your first sentence of your statement is the third answer in the first category. What would you like to have happen or like to see happen? Well, that becomes your first sentence. So what your first sentence for your solution statement is, what we would like to see happen is, and you just pull your answer from there to here. Do the same thing with the second category. How does the issue impact the family? Using the third question's answer, what is needed for the family to move forward? So now your second sentence is, what's needed to move forward is, and now you're accumulating these answers from these categories, the third question, and it's actually becoming your first sentence, your second sentence, your third sentence, your fourth sentence, and your fifth sentence in your solution statement. So your solution statement is going to sound something like, what we would like to see happen is, and what's needed to move forward will be, and then the third question from the third category, what it will look like when completed will be, and then what we expect will be, and then what's required for us to have a successful response is. Now those are your 5 sentences. You've just constructed your solution. And this is how you go back using a model for creating a solution for any issue in life you have to face. You can use this as a way of approaching it. Now let's go to the other area, which is the second coping skill, making a decision. Let's make a value-based decision. Let's make a decision each time that kind of balances with what we value most. So first we want to determine, what are our values? Well, the best way to do that is to write down on a piece of paper, what types of things do you as an individual value most? And each member of your family can do this in a kind of a group exercise. And then once you've done that, I value love, I value honesty, I value relationships and sharing. These could all be an individual's 1, 2, 3. Then prioritize them. Which of the 1, 2, 3 is most important? Then have each member of the family do the same thing. And then you can sit there and say to the family, what was your number 1? What was your number 2? What was your number 1? What was your number 1? What was your number 1? And then what was your 2? What was your 2? What was your 3? What was your 3? And where you start to see many people in the family say, well, my number 1 is relationships, my number 2 was trust, and my number 3 was love. Well, then you talk to another person, they say, well, my number 1 was love, my number 2 was personal expression or confidentiality, or so they mentioned something different, but they did mention love. And then the third member of the family happens to mention love also. You know now that love is a value of the family. So whatever decisions you make, you want to balance it on the fact of, does this disrupt our values? If it does, at least you know that it does, and to what degree. You're calculating that. But at least also you're including, what do we value most? Let's make sure our decisions don't counter that. And now, in the first step, we're going to identify exactly what's happened. And this is, by the way, in your book, okay? And it is for each of the episodes. Now, identify exactly what's happened, what happened, how did it happen, who did it happen to. Then the second step is analyze the situation, assess the problem, identify the problem, and in what areas did the problem create an impact. You're writing all of these down. The third step of that the third step in the decision-making model is, what is the number of one contributing factor? What is causing this issue to take place? You need to know that before you make a decision. The fourth step is, now that you know the number one factor, you need to go out and find out what information there is about this. Your primary source, you're going to go to the actual person or organization that's involved with this and ask them, what is this issue, and help us to understand it better. The secondary source would be, somebody's telling you this happened, or somebody suggests that you should do something a certain way, and it's coming from somebody else other than the primary source. It could be an article, a clinical paper. These are all secondary sources, and you gather them and you make them part of your primary, secondary information gathering. The third area that you look at is your gut. What does your gut, because that's often where our faith comes in, and other things that are very important when making decisions get included. So trust your gut is what we're saying in the decision-making process. The fifth step in making a good quality decision is where you're taking a criteria and saying, let's take what we're going to make a decision about and let's balance it on the criteria to make sure that we're covering all of our bases. And this will ensure safety of your loved one. Is safety a part of what's being considered? And do we have the resources that are needed to do the decision we're looking at? And then, do we understand the timetable? Is it realistic? And do we understand the negative impacts? Because every decision has a positive and negative. Well, identify what the negative outcomes might be so that you can weight the factor of, is this a good decision? And then, would you do this would you ask others to do this if they were doing it for you? Meaning it was done for you or to you. Is this still a good decision? These are all areas that you want to take a look at. The third coping skill is in the area of the family plan of action. And everybody could say, well, Roy, listen, we're just going to go out and do it. Well, it's going to get done a lot more effectively. I want to warn you that the addiction industry is not organized. And then again, either is the family. So you're taking two disorganized organizations and you're putting them together. So a plan is a very good idea. The other factor is, you're going to more than likely require the assistance of a lot of different groups. And as time goes by, those groups are going to change. And now it's a whole new set of groups that you're dealing with. When you're at the hospital, the ER, that's what that is. Then you move over to detox, that's what that is. Then you move over to therapy and treatment, and that lasts for 16 weeks. That's what that is. Then you're looking at sober living, recovery, maybe incarceration, and then reentry. On all that's involved in that. So there's all sorts of reasons why a plan put on paper based on the decision and the information gathering that you've made, based on the solution that you want to use, are very good ideas. It all comes together with the plan of action. Then you take the plan of action and you go find a professional to help you. Everything that we've done up to now is to position you to a place where you can be properly assisted and directed and supported. This is what's often missing in the families. This is what exhausts the families. This is where the families get into fights internally on. So, for that reason, we're going to apply the 3D coping skills. Determine a solution. We're going to develop a decision, and we're going to design a plan of action. And we're going to do it each time. I hope this is helpful for you. I'm confident it will be.